history of the Civil War, actually the hidden history of Civil War Florida. And we're really excited to welcome back to the museum our former museum director. Robert was the museum director here for between 3 and 4 years and led our activities here at the museum. We're fond of this guy. He's written 5 books now about local area and general Florida history. And so please join me in welcoming Robert Redd.
So yeah, this is my newest book, published in June of last year. As you can see, Arcadia Publishing. They have published all 5 of my books so far. Little plug with the ISBN there, you know, never hurts anybody. So far the book has been very well received through Christmas. It sold a lot of copies. I don't have a number yet, but did receive some very positive reviews through Civil War Monitor magazine, the Emerging Civil War website, and also Civil War Books and Authors. And if you read Civil War literature, you really need to be following Drew's blog on that. He keeps up with all kinds of new releases from small publishers through academic. He's well respected, so I was very honored that he took the time to review the book, let alone have positive words to say about it. So a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Florida. I don't know how many of you can say that, so, okay. Received my Bachelor of Arts degree from Stetson University in American Studies, and promptly went to work in retail because that's what you do when you don't have a job. So I spent quite a few years in that. I progressed into retail management and was very lucky to get out of that business and into museum work that I really wanted to do. Last year I completed my Master of Arts degree in Public History through American Public University. Served as executive director here. I currently work for the County of Volusia, as you can see, in Parks, Recreation, and Culture. I like to joke I am the culture in Parks, Recreation, and Culture because I'm the only employee dealing with culture. So Greg will be seeing me next week. One of my major roles is the Community Cultural Grant Program that provides funding to organizations such as this. As Greg said, 5 books have been published. Today, actually, on my lunch hour, I signed off on the first round of publisher edits for book number 6. It's a book I have co-written with Dr. Nick Wynn and Dr. Joe Knetch, and I was very humbled when they asked me to participate in that. You know, these are scholars well above my rank, and for them to consider me worthy, I jumped at the opportunity. Florida at Sea, a maritime history, will be coming to a bookstore close to you in May. So somehow we have edits done, but we don't have a cover yet. That's never happened in 5 books. So I'm currently at work on a single authored book that will deal with human rights issues in Florida. That's also under contract to Arcadia. Once I completed edits today, I was working on women's suffrage in Florida. So, and I've got dozens of book ideas, and I just don't have the time. If anybody can figure out how I can retire and keep up with my lifestyle, I would very much appreciate it. So how did this book come about? You know, as I said before, I've got dozens of ideas. I've got projects that are started in various stages of completion. The 4 books that I've written before this have very targeted markets. 2 of them you're probably familiar with are on New Smyrna Beach. You get outside New Smyrna Beach, there's not a lot of interest in these books, however. And once you get out of Volusia County, forget it. At the urging of a friend of mine, UCF professor Dr. James Clark, and the museum has a couple of books of his up in the gift shop as well. Jim has a habit of just poking the bear a little bit. He sent me one yesterday. His most recent book has been picked up for, oh goodness, not Kindle, whatever the, Audible, yeah. So, and I've never seen a book through Arcadia get picked up by Audible. So, he sends me copies of his royalty statements, just a poke, like, look what I'm doing and you're not. But Jim is actually a really great guy. Greg mentioned HistoryCon. If you go to HistoryCon, he will be speaking on one of his earlier books, Presidents in Florida. Jim's a really good guy. So, but he kept urging me to think bigger. Don't just think, what's the next New Smyrna book? What's the next, Daytona Beach book, something like that. What can you do that will actually sell some copies of books? It's great to put the history out there, but I got to tell you, the first 4 books, I'm still in the hole for research costs. So if that tells you anything. Working with my acquisitions editor at Arcadia, we discussed quite a few different topics. They know what they're looking for. They know what sells. He shot down a couple that I was actually a little bit disappointed in, but that's okay. We'll revisit those. But the American Civil War continues to be a popular but yet controversial subject. So as we discussed that a little more, it was how can we fill a need, but not be a hit piece, so to speak. And one of their series is Hidden Histories. So, as I'm looking through their website, looking through other titles, it really just made sense. I pitched that, and within a week I had a contract in my hand to sign. And as you see, these are stories that generally are not going to have the potential for a full-length book treatment. I think there's one that made the final cut that I could make an argument I could expand on enough, but again, go back to number 1 here. It's not going to sell that many copies. So just a quick rundown of the table of contents of the book. Secession. How and why did Florida secede from the Union? Not a shot was fired. That deals with St. Augustine and the fact that the city was turned over twice, but no guns were ever fired in this. The troops must be fed. Florida is and was seen as a food source by Confederate politicians, by generals, by anybody who had no idea what they were talking about, as it turns out, really. Yeah, Florida did have cattle. Florida had a lot of emaciated cattle. Florida didn't have a transportation system to get them from South Florida to Georgia to Virginia to Mississippi. And generals in the field never did understand that. Our home, Volusia County, and that's what we're going to talk about in a few minutes here. The Battle of Mariana, just a small, to use the term battle may not be appropriate, but to call it the Skirmish of Mariana doesn't sound quite as nice. The West Florida Seminary Cadets. When you think of seminary today, it's a religious term. This was actually a military school for boys. And in that chapter, we talk about the role that these sometimes very young boys, under 10, played in the Battle of Natural Bridge. Not the Battle of Natural Bridge in Virginia. Nope. Nope. There's an area outside of Tallahassee, and it actually ended up being a Confederate victory, and probably, even though very late in the war and had no impact on the outcome, helped keep Tallahassee out of Union hands at the time. The Lincoln assassination. There's a couple of tie-ins to the Lincoln assassination here in Florida. Key West. I know Lynn and Drew are probably pretty familiar with the Samuel Mudd story. But also if you go over to Geneva, Florida, just over in Orange County, or is it Seminole County? I don't remember. You'll find the skull of one of the Lincoln assassins. His skull is buried there. And visiting the Civil War in Florida, just some ideas of places that you can visit. So as I said, we're going to talk about Volusia County tonight. Volusia County in 1860, on the eve of the Civil War, it was just a back country, a very poor area. The 1860 census reported 1,158 people here. I bet more than that moved to New Smyrna Beach last year. So, yeah, well, I was trying to be nice. So, 861 white residents, about 74% of the population. Of those 861, 855 were native born to the United States. We're going to talk about that in just a minute and what I think that means, or what that partially means. 1860, there were 38 slaveholders in Volusia County, only 5% of white residents. Maybe a little bit misleading on that. The odds of women owning slaves were pretty slim. Husband and wife, they would have been registered to men, not to the wives. Also doesn't take children into account. And I didn't bother going that in-depth into the census. It's really kind of boring, actually. There were 297 enslaved African Americans, about 26% of the population. 158 males, 139 females. Males will do the hard work. The women do home labor, but they also reproduce. You reproduce slaves, those are free for you and potentially valuable. The largest slaveholder in Volusia County was John Fletcher, and I am going to butcher his last name, Peggs, perhaps, out of Enterprise. I had never heard of him until I went to the slave schedule for 1860. He owned 34 slaves, 17 men, 17 women. His real estate was valued at $15,000, and personal property, which would have included those slaves, was $25,000. His slaves ranged in age from 3 to 65, so he had them at all stages of life. Peggs was born in South Carolina, and he and his family moved to Florida in the 1850s. I did not check to see where he was buried. I have no idea. As you would probably guess, Volusia County was highly agricultural in 1860. 62 farms were recorded. No manufacturing of any kind was recorded in Volusia County. 52 of these 62 farms were smaller than 50 acres. These are small landowners. These are not wealthy people in general. Only one farm is recorded over 1,000 acres. And again, I did not delve deeply enough into census records to figure out who that is. Only 3,008 acres were recorded as being improved. Again, you take New Smyrna Beach and, you know. So what do some of these numbers probably tell us? To me, it tells that chances are pretty good these residents were conservative, maybe suspicious of outsiders, and certainly would have held on to the slavery ideal, even though, as we see, not many owned slaves, but there was always that striving to be a slave owner. Wow, that looks worse than it does on my computer screen.
It looks better from back here.
Okay, thank you. So the first story I want to talk about is William Rollinsky. And Rollinsky, as you can see, was born in Russia. If you look him up online, you may see that he was born somewhere in Eastern Europe. Generally, Russia seems to be the agreed upon location. Died in 1914 near what is now Ponce Inlet. He was a Civil War soldier, but also a lighthouse keeper. And that's a little bit important to our story here. And if you go online, there aren't very many photos of Rollinsky. You kind of take a crapshoot. Do you take this one from the United States Lighthouse Society, or do you grab one from the Ponce Inlet Lighthouse that doesn't look any better, really? So, Rollinsky, when he came to the United States, settled in Charleston. Kind of funny because my publisher is in Charleston, so a little tie in there that only makes me laugh. During the Civil War, he served in Company A of the 24th South Carolina. This company was nicknamed the Marion Rifles. A lot of, almost all companies had some kind of nickname they went by. It appears that, looking at his compiled service record, that he enlisted in April of 1862 for a period of the war. Now, when you look at compiled service records, it might be 30 days, might be 60 days, it might be a year, but for him, it was for the war. April of 1863, he served as a prisoner of war guard in Alabama. And in July of 1864, he was captured by Sherman's troops near Atlanta, where he was sent to Camp Douglas. He took the oath of allegiance to the United States and was ultimately discharged from Confederate service in May of '65. His service record does give us some idea of what he might have looked like. Dark complexion, gray eyes, and he was 5'8". So. Rollinsky, he joined the Lighthouse service in 1883, and he served in St. Augustine at the St. Augustine Lighthouse. As we see here, the Ponce Inlet Lighthouse was activated in November of 1887. He was granted the title of keeper at the end of that year for the whopping salary of $720.
Pretty good for that.
plus getting to live out in the middle of nowhere, as you can see. It's not quite the same as it is today. So, Rollinsky apparently was a little difficult to get along with, and while I kind of politely listed it that he was transferred to a light station in South Carolina, that was probably not of his own volition. He argued with the assistant keepers. He stayed there till 1902 when he retired, and he and the family later moved back to the Mosquito Inlet area, and as we saw earlier, he passed away. So Rollinsky was buried in an unmarked grave in Hawks Park Cemetery, now Edgewater New Smyrna Cemetery. So nobody knew he was there. Supposedly his wife is there as well, but she has no marker. Private Rollinsky now does have a marker, though. The Sons of Confederate Veterans in 2005 erected this government issue headstone for him, and it kind of cut off as I was playing around in PowerPoint, but you can always tell Confederate stones versus Union stones. Confederates have the point on them. So there are several other Confederates who are buried near him. Benjamin Fox, if you've seen the photo of the gigantic Goliath grouper, that's Benjamin Fox. C.B. Futch, Frank Sams, and Rodolphus Swift Sheldon, who was the son of John and Jane, who play a role later on. So our next victim is John Milton Hawks. And I had never realized this. He went by the name Milton, not John. Milton was his preferred. So Milton earned a medical degree in 1847. And shortly thereafter married Esther Hill Hawks. We're going to talk about her in just a minute as well. They originally came to Florida in 1854 on their honeymoon, but did not stay. The Hawks would have been considered abolitionists, maybe not to the degree that a William Lloyd Garrison would have been, but you know. He was sent to South Carolina as a member of the Freedmen's Aid Association, and in 1862, without telling Esther, he signed up for military service and received the rank of major in the United States Army. He was a surgeon, you know, so he got a higher rank than where you or I would have gone in as a private. I don't know how you can see over here. So in February 1864, Milton was sent to Florida, which he would have loved because he liked the state. He was sent to care for wounded soldiers as part of the Battle of Olustee. By the way, I don't discuss Olustee in my book at all, but I explain why I don't. So after the war, he returned to Florida. He invested heavily in something called the Florida Land and Lumber Company. He also purchased 500 acres at what was then the high price of $1 or $500. I challenge you to even find 1 acre of swampland for $500 around here. He created the community of Port Orange. And I found this quote If you know the name Charles Coe, which you might know that name, he was writing in a 1941 newspaper about Hawks, and he claims, this is a Hawks quote, "I chose the name of Port Orange because there was no other Port Orange post office in the United States. So if a person forgot to add the state on the envelope, it would make it to Florida." Pretty clever. I don't know if that's really true or not. Seems a little far-fetched, but we don't want that one yet. So by 1869, the Florida Land and Lumber Company was in pretty bad shape. It was underfunded to begin with. They were really starting everything from scratch. Remember, as I said, in 1860, there's no manufacturing in Volusia County, there's no industry in Volusia County. So what are they having to do in order to run a lumber company? When you gotta build everything, you've gotta bring everything in. Nobody in Florida is creating sawmill parts. So it's, you know, the workers that he brought in, newly freed African Americans, they had to clear land, they had to build homes, they had to plant crops. Boy, this sounds an awful lot like their life in slavery to me, but, and I've seen that referenced a couple places, that what they were dealing with was not much different than what they knew before. But all of this cost money that Hawks did not have. And within just a couple of years, he was already having trouble meeting payroll demands. Well, what do workers do when they're not getting paid? They leave. They don't stay around. Things aren't going to get better. For those freed slaves that stayed, however, we have the Freemanville settlement. And today, Freemanville is generally considered a rectangle west of US 1. West Ocean Avenue is the border to the south. The western border is Alexander Avenue, and to the north is Valley Street. None of that means very much to me unless I'm over there. But in 2002, the city of Port Orange and the state of Florida erected this state historic marker. You can see this marker. It is at the entry to Riverwalk Park on US 1. It's on the east side, and but to get to it, you got to park in the park and then walk back out to US 1. So. And it's not always easy to see, too. As you see in the back, there's some overgrown trees. I think I drove by it about 3 times before I finally realized where it was so I could stop and get a photo. Today, many people claim that Mount Moriah Baptist Church is the last standing structure of Freemanville. There's a little bit of academic debate on that, not a huge amount. Lynn Limpel, if anybody knows that name, he was a professor at both Embry-Riddle and Daytona State College. He is actively involved with the Halifax Historical Society. He is really the recognized expert on Freemanville. He's done a lot of work on that. We had him speak at the museum many years ago when I was here, so I haven't talked to him in a few years, so I'm not sure what he's up to. So today, if you go out to Edgewater New Smyrna Cemetery, you can see where John Milton Hawks is buried. He's got 2 markers, one a standard issue United States military stone, and then a second one right behind it. In his later years, he was active. This east coast of Florida, I don't know if there are still copies in the gift shop or not. At one time there were. It's a little tiny white book. His town was named Hawks Park after him, but as you see in 1924, Edgewater, I guess it sounded better. Kind of like Mosquito Inlet doesn't sound so good. So, but what we haven't talked about his wife Esther. Where was she during all of this? She knew this Florida Land and Lumber Company wasn't a good idea. She was on to that. She did not live locally, actually. Esther Hill, however, was quite an extraordinary woman. As a woman, she received her medical degree in 1857, and as might be expected when the Civil War came around, she was told, no thank you, we don't need you. They didn't even want her as a nurse. So she followed Milton around for a while. After the war, she did not stay in Florida, however. She went back to New Hampshire, where she was from. The interesting part of this, as you see, Hawks' diaries were found in a dumpster, actually. And they were edited. So if you've read, say, Mary Chestnut or Sarah Morgan, some of these other women's diaries and reminiscences of the Civil War, a woman doctor of Civil War is certainly one you should consider. I can't remember who published it. It's still in print. It's available in paperback. So, and the Library of Congress holds many of her papers that were not part of that. Those diaries are still in private hands. The gentleman that found them, as far as I know, still owns them. So Scott's Great Snake, or the Anaconda Plan, as you probably know it, was General Winfield Scott's effort to strangle the Confederacy into returning to the Union. I see a fairly famous image. That's one of the most common ones you'll see out of it. It's from the Library of Congress. But what the Anaconda Plan did was it placed a premium on blockade running, and blockade running became dangerous but yet very, very profitable for boat captains. And I won't say ships because you weren't going to bring ships in. These were small vessels, shallow draft. They could be quick. They could get in and out very quickly. Big U.S. ships were not going to chase them. So Mosquito Inlet, of course, became a prime area for blockade running for several reasons. One, if you've got a ship in, you're fairly close to the St. Johns River. You can get goods north fairly quickly from that. You can get them to Jacksonville. Of course, Jacksonville was in and out of Union hands. But around here, you had salt manufacturing, which is basically boiling seawater until all that's left is the salt, which was very important for Confederate efforts for preserving meat. Timber was another one that was very important. But blockade runners would come back with needed items that the South couldn't produce. Clothes, guns generally for this area. And the Union goal was, if you could stop this in and out, stop Confederate economic activity, you would ultimately strangle the home front. The home front would then put pressure on their husbands in the field. Husbands in the field would see the difficulties at home and would perhaps leave the battlefield. So we get to March of 1862, and Lieutenant Thomas Budd and Acting Master Samuel Mather were ordered to make a reconnaissance of this area. So March 22nd, they begin their journey through the inlet. For those of you who have maybe taken a boat tour out through there, even today, that's a pretty harrowing experience at times, depending on the weather, depending on the tides. So they started, they had an escaped slave who was serving as their guide. So Bud, Mather, and their 44 men, they sailed past the Sheldon Hotel, which is now Old Fort Park, or part of Old Fort Park as we know. That's peculiar. They sailed south past the Turnbull Wharf and continued south towards what is now Edgewater, Oak Hill. They eventually found an abandoned schooner, and then they proceeded back north. But they made a couple of mistakes here. One, they stayed close to the river edge, and then they stopped at the Turnbull Wharf. There are legends as to why they stopped there. One deals with money, one deals with weapons. Nobody really knows. But ultimately, waiting for them were members of the 3rd Florida Infantry who had seen these men sail south. They knew they were coming back north. That was the only way for them to get out. So Captain Daniel Byrd and Matthew Strain just waited. So there was a short skirmish. Union sailors were not expecting this, so they were completely ambushed. Bud was killed. Mather was seriously wounded. 7 others were mortally wounded. The African-American guide was taken prisoner. He was hanged somewhere to the west of here. So today, what remains, you can kind of see the remains of the Turnbull era wharf. This marker discusses both the wharf and the skirmish, but we've got something wrong here. There's something that just isn't right. That date. That date just is not right. And I didn't think about it when I was first looking at it, and I'm reviewing this, and I'm like, oh God, I gotta go fix that. I just made an error. No, I didn't make an error. The Jane Sheldon DAR made an error. So, back in 1940, and you know, it's not a very good picture of this, but when they had that cast, they had a wrong date on there. So, the 22nd. So, and I double checked that. You know, back when they had this, the official records were not online and easily searchable. You know, so not a big deal in the overall.
Year is correct.
Yes. Yep. March of '62. You know, for most people, that's going to be good enough. Hold on just a minute. So one thing that's always puzzled me about this story is what did these men look like? You know, what did they really look like? We have a pretty good guess, I'm sure. You know, the standard Union officer, dark hair, probably a big bushy beard. You know, that's just standard for the time. So I recently came across this, however. This image of Samuel Mather. Never seen that before. So this was included in a lot at Cowan's auction a couple of years ago. Needless to say, I didn't know about that. It actually sold relatively cheaply for I think there were 3 or 4 different pieces with it. Mather is buried in Connecticut under a really pretty impressive monument there. So the Mather family must have had money. But what I would like to leave you with is this question. Did this 1862 attack and killing of a Union officer, did that ultimately lead to the 1863 shelling and complete destruction of the Sheldon Hotel? You know, you can certainly maybe make a connection on that, but what you're going to lack is any hard evidence on that. There are no orders from Union officers stating that. There are no after action reports stating that. It would leave me to say the 1863 action was done to work on destroying New Smyrna as a blockade running area, and had nothing to do with 1862. Am I right? I don't know. You know, tomorrow, who knows? Letters from an officer or somebody participating may come up and say different. And then I would, of course, change my mind. So with that, a couple of brief little things. I did prepare a recommended Civil War reading list for those who might be interested. I will say I only printed 50 copies, and I was hoping that was also going to get me through HistoryCon in a week. But if you are interested, please help yourself. And if we run out, I can certainly share this list with Greg. It's actually on my flash drive, so I could give it to him tonight.
We have a month to read all the books.
A month. God, I mean, it is 2 pages. Jeez, you know. It's, a word on this. Most of these are going to be fairly readily available. A couple of them are a little tougher. You know, you can probably get most of them through interlibrary loan, to be honest. You know, these range from, you know, 1900s titles up through current. But the one thing, and you will find in my book, I spend some time discussing at the beginning, is it's kind of a very brief historiography of Florida in the Civil War.
Could you tell us that now?
Could I?
The brief now.
Well, what that is it's, I discuss certain titles and what they are. I mean, to really go into it now is, you know, I'd have to look at it, to be honest. But you know, it's kind of an abbreviated recommended reading list of this. This is compiled from my bibliography and also some other sources as well. Just, you know, if you were to start wanting to put together a Florida in the Civil War library, you know, it's not a bad starting point. I did not, however, list any academic journal articles. I could have gone on for pages and pages just through Florida Historical Quarterly. And that's actually where some of the best scholarship nowadays is coming from for the subject. So with that in mind, questions, comments, thoughts?
Did Florida contribute any troops that fought in the battles?
Yeah.
North?
Yeah,
How
they.
many of them, were there? Or?
God, I knew somebody was going to ask me that, and I should have written it out. Yes, there were actually troops for the Confederacy and the Union. Somewhere around 15,000 maybe. There is actually a 6-volume listing that discusses this, and it goes through by regiment and by company and lists out names and tells you what I've actually got it on here. It's called the Biographical Roster of Florida's Confederate and Union Troops. Stetson University supposedly has this set. Iona said it's invaluable. City Island Library used to have a set, and as I was preparing this, I went on the Volusia County Library site and I can't find it, so I'm guessing they have jettisoned that from their collection for whatever reason. It was in their genealogy room. It's really useful.
Yes, was there a Florida militia at the start of the Civil War? Did they have an organized militia at all, or?
A lot of home guard. Yeah, a lot of it was home guard type groups that then would be, you know, called into larger service. So.
Was the 3rd Florida Infantry that was here at the battle, were they stationed here? Were they native Floridians? Was that
They would have been native Floridians. If I remember correctly, they had been in St. Augustine and were chased out of St. Augustine, and this is kind of where they ended up. I would have to just check to see where they ended up fighting. They didn't stay in Florida though.
Did the Confederacy try to protect Mosquito Inlet as an inlet for goods? So
No.
they didn't station anybody down?
No, Robert E. Lee, before he became Robert E. Lee, had actually basically requested removing anybody that was non-essential from Florida. Florida wasn't really considered to be that valuable to the war efforts, especially, you know, the majority of your leadership are from Virginia. A lot of the battle is going on in Virginia.
So he was willing to just exceed or let Florida go to the Unionists if we'd have a Southern front?
Yeah.
And this is a West Point graduate?
Well, you have to remember though, I mean, what's the population of Florida? It's not really contributing very much. It's
It's the military value.
Union troops are coming from the north. They're generally not coming from south headed
I
north.
know,
So,
it's a convenient backdoor if the Union wanted to be.
yeah, but they never used it. So, you know, there was very little in terms of rail. So much of South Florida was still swamp and mosquitoes and was really dangerous country. You know, it wasn't friendly territory. So, yeah, I just think both sides didn't overly think too much of it. At one point, Lincoln had a goal to try and turn Florida and bring it back into the Union, but I don't think he put considerable effort into it. One real quick thing, you know, I worked here for quite a few years. This museum will always have a special spot for me. The volunteers that I worked with meant the world to me at the time. So a few years ago, you know, hitting antique stores in the area, I came across an item. The museum has nothing like this. So, Greg, I would like to give you that.
I get to unwrap.
You get to unwrap a couple of trash bags because the Christmas wrapping paper had already been put away. You could see through the bags. Had to do it twice.
Oh, look at that. It's one of Hannah Benet's real Hannah Benet obviously was a realtor here in New Smyrna Beach. She was also the first female city commissioner and first female mayor for the city. There's a small art piece statue that sits there in our lobby that commemorates Hannah. She was very well known for her large hats and her costume jewelry. And so you'll see those elements in the statue. But thank you very much. This is fantastic. Yeah, thanks so much. One more time, join me in thanking Robert for coming out.